very brief pause. So, as I said before, we're going to be now hearing from a person who is a real expert in innovation. He knows, he has experience. So we're lucky to have with us Saul Berman, who is going to talk to us about how to really leverage those technological advances and developments. We have heard of Berman, but before, we're going to hear Gonzalo Diaz introducing Mr. Berman's expertise. Sir. Yes, well, very briefly, because
quería presentar a Saul J. Berman y agradecer desde aquí también a IBM.
I need to thank IBM for their very generous cooperation with FICOD. No doubt that outstanding and will continue to be outstanding in the future. Saul J. Berman is in charge of strategy and innovation and consulting in IBM, and he talks and focuses on these issues. He develops business strategies for leading internationals in the world, and he also heads a team of IBM consultants at an international level who create value by means of business activities, technology, and different strategies. He has over 5 years' experience as a consultant with leading multinationals. He also advises startups. He's worked with the leading media, internet companies, communications companies, and he participates at the World Economic Forum, the MidCom, and the Association of Online Publications, or Hollywood Online. So, Saul, thank you very much for being with us today.
Enjoy FICOD. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today and have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. If I can just invite a little audience participation before we get started here, and I can see most of you out there. Can you all raise your hands a second? Okay, just want to make sure you're understanding my communication. How many of you have ever seen me present before? Anybody see me at the Festival of Media in Valencia? Okay, that's always good because I can tell the same stories again. But I'm with IBM, and as somebody suggested to you, I'm responsible for our strategy practice. I have to admit, however, I'm a technology Luddite. People think because you work for IBM that you can fix all their devices and get them all to connect to each other. I usually have to get help in doing that. I'm on the business side of IBM, and people know that IBM invests significant sums of money in technology. But most people don't know that IBM also invests tens of millions of dollars a year in business research. So that's the part of the IBM organization, Global Business Services, that I come from. I focus on strategy, particularly in the media and entertainment industry, and I focus on this topic of digital transformation and innovation. One of the previous speakers this morning spoke about the world of possibilities here, of connected TV and all the opportunities we're going to have. However, there's one challenge in that I'm going to talk about, and that's called money. Now, when I wrote my first paper on the media industry in 1999, many of you can remember back to the internet boom we were having at that time that Guy Kawasaki and I think others made a lot of money out of. In that time period, we wrote a paper and we said, Wall Street will wake up again and profits will matter. Well, that turned out to be true in the bubble of 1999, and it's a challenge many companies have today of where is the money going to come from. Now, how many of you have ever listened to Chris Anderson from Wired Magazine? Anybody heard Chris speak? Okay. He's got a concept called free. He wrote a book, that named Free. That's kind of nice, except the question is, most people in this business, I think, still want to make money. And Chris argues that all content should be free, because he argues, if you remember your basic economics, that marginal price should follow marginal cost, and that marginal cost of digital distribution, because of all these pipes Telefonica and everybody are going to build, the marginal cost is near zero, and therefore the marginal price should be near zero, and near zero is not near as good as zero, and therefore all content should be free. I've got a book coming out from Harvard next year called Not for Free. The idea is that somebody's going to pay for this, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But let me take you on a little bit of a journey here about some of our thinking over the years. We've been writing about these things since about 1999. I wrote a paper in 2002 called Vying for Attention, and talking about this world we were going to have in the future, where we're going to have all this content bombarding us in all these different places on all these different screens. And by the way, anybody wants copies of any of this, it's all available. It's all open content, free on IBM.com. But in 2002, we talked about vying for attention, and the idea that the problem was not going to be the amount of content, the problem was going to be how to find the content you want, and how to get through the clutter of the content, and how to make an impression. And why is that? Well, we still live in a world where there's 24 hours in the day and 7 days in the week. And all the scientists at IBM and elsewhere that invent and file all these patents every year, I don't think they're going to be able to change that. Now, we are cutting our content, if you will, in ingestion into finer and finer parts and trying to optimize, and we have more devices. But the question is, we've only got a finite capacity. Now, some people argue that the answer to this is multitasking. How many of you think you can multitask? Okay, well, I've argued that you don't really multitask. I argue that you packet switch, meaning you cut your content segments into finer and finer bytes, and if you just went to your BlackBerry right now, you didn't listen to me, but you got the gist of what I said before and after that, and you put it together. The scientists at IBM, when I joined IBM, after having been a strategy consultant at Boston Consulting Group and at PW and PwC Consulting, the scientists at IBM said I was wrong. They said that women can multitask, and it's just that men can't multitask. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. They say it has something to do with child rearing, so I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to figure that one out. But regardless, the question is, how do you cut through the clutter of content? How do you get your content to be the content that people take advantage of? And if you're in the advertising business, how do you get people to pay attention to your advertising? And we'll come back to that challenge, because that's where a lot of the money comes from. So we wrote a paper in 2006 called, and there's more before that, but I won't go into all of them, The End of Television as We Know It. And some people didn't like me as when I wrote some of these papers, but we heard earlier this morning basically the same point I was making in 2006. Now let me see a show of hands. How many people have a phonograph? Maybe about 5% of the audience. That's about how many percent of your grandchildren will have a television set. Now that doesn't mean they won't watch video content. They'll watch more video content than ever. They listen to more music today than ever. But let's use the music industry, and we'll come back to that as an example of where did all the money go if we're listening to more content than ever. In 2007, we wrote a paper on navigating the media divide, and in that one we said part of the challenge in this new world is that the traditional content companies and the traditional distribution companies were very closely aligned, whether they be wholesalers or whether they be retailers. But now we're suggesting in this open world that we're increasingly predicting that their interests may not be aligned. Not only may they not be aligned, they may be in conflict with each other. So, I come from Hollywood. When some of the people in Hollywood suggest, and they suggested it again in the last week or two, that we release the movie and we also allow people to buy the content, used to be VHS or DVD, now digitally, in their home while the movie's still in the movie theater, heresy. The motion picture exhibitors don't like that. When we want to put some of the content on the web, some of the traditional broadcast affiliates don't like it. When we want to release some of this content digitally, some of the traditional retailers don't like it. Why? Because our distribution partners usually optimize their opportunity by a closed environment where they control, if you will, behind a walled garden and make more of the money. Content companies, we think, increasingly will make more of the money by going, as we'll talk here, beyond content and getting their content out there in partnerships with that we'll talk about in as many places as possible. So we started some of that thinking in 2007. 2008, we said, and boy was our timing great, the end of advertising as we know it. And then came the crash and advertising went down and we sort of said, see, we told you so. But now it's come bouncing back. But some of those concepts are still out there around advertising. The consumer now has control. If they want to skip the ad, they can skip the ad. If they want to go online and hang up, they can hang up. Increasingly, we have consumer control of their environment. And as I've told my friends in the music industry, and I tell my friends in the video industry now, please, we're not advertising. So when people say to me, is the advertising spend going to go up or is the advertising spend going to go down? I say, wrong question. It's not about the advertising spend, it's about the marketing spend. And in the digital world, increasingly we should be competing for the marketing budget. And then we also said how advertising is to be bought and sold more in these open networks is going to increase at the same time. So that we then suggested in 2009, if you want to capture more of the marketing dollars, well, first you got to worry about the marketing dollars, and you got to have an integrated, contextual, addressable, cross-platform capability to capture those dollars. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And what we're talking about today is, what we call beyond content. Who is going to get the value? It's not only how big is the pie, but it's who gets the money. So let's take one example from the music industry and then we'll get into more specifics. How many of you have an iToy? Okay. How many had one of the first iPods that came out? Okay. So you've been there a while. So a very interesting model here. The music industry was struggling with what to do about digital. Everybody was stealing music. And Apple came along and said, we've got this new thing called the iPod. And you can have all the music you want on the iPod for free if you steal it, or near free, 99 cents if you want to pay us for it. And we're going to be very nice, and we're going to give 75 cents of each dollar, or 99 cents or 99 euros, to the music companies. And we'll get 25 cents, which barely pays our costs. But when they sell you a new device every year, who gets all the money on the device? Apple. The music companies don't get any of it. So remember the razor blade model? Any of you who studied Gillette or had that case in school? The razor blade model was we gave you a razor for free and you paid us by buying the blades for the rest of your life. Some cell phone companies do that with the minutes. What Apple did was they reversed the model. And they said, oh, by the way, this thing has a battery in it that lasts for about a year. And when that battery dies, what do? You buy a new one, you can get the battery replaced for at least $100 or 100 euros. Or you can get a whole new device that's even better that we just brought out every 6 months for $100 more. This is a pretty interesting model. And then let's take it a step further. How much is an album of music online? 9.99 euros or dollars. A song, 99 cents. Okay, now you want to buy a 10-second clip-it of that 3-minute song. How much are you going to pay me for the 10-second clip-it? How about 2, 3, 4 euros? So wait, let me get this right. The whole song is 99 pence or 99 cents or 0.99 euros, but a 10-second clip-it is 2, 3, or 4 euros. Yeah, we call it a ringtone. So now 10 seconds of the song costs more than the whole song. Pretty good model if you can get away with it. Pretty good model if you can do it. So, there is innovation going out there, and we're going to talk about some of this innovation, but part of the problem is who gets the money. Not only is there any money, but who gets the money? So in this case, there's a big shift. Let's talk about beyond content and some of the changes that are going out there today as we speak. Historically, content captured the value, and there's certainly places where that's the case. But increasingly, the consumer is paying for an integrated experience. So content is part of the equation, content is critical to the equation, but to get the true value out of the content we create, we have to think beyond the content. The competition, where did the competition used to come from? When I went to my friends in the music industry, we talked about the other 3 or 4 or 5 music companies. If I went to my friends in the studio business where I work, we talked to the other 5 or 6 major studios. Those were our competition. But all of a sudden, we got Apple, we got Google, we got Yahoo. All of a sudden, these people are competitors of ours, beyond even our traditional partners. So lots of new potential competitors in this experience-based economy. Content was how we got the scale and reach. Increasingly, it's platforms that are going to deliver the scale and reach. We used to get a revenue premium for reach. Now we're going to get a revenue premium for making it contextual, for making it relevant. We used to have one size fits all. Everybody bought things in the same way. Now we're going to have lots of different pricing models, lots of different ways to monetize your content. We used to have siloed marketing and media spend. Now those are going to be increasingly integrated experiences. So we're in a situation where the demand is real. This is a good situation. This is a good opportunity. The digital world is taking off. But the challenge is, where's the money going and who gets the money? Because potentially, as Jeff Zucker said, we're moving from the real world of analog dollars to digital pennies. And most of us in the business don't want to have our salaries moved from dollars to pennies. We'd like to continue to make money. So it's an opportunity, and we suggest you can make money, you can make more money than you ever did because there's more money being spent and there's more demand than ever. But to do that, you've got to focus beyond the content. So what do we mean by that? We're moving from a world where we had very traditional forms of media that were separate to very new forms of media that are increasingly interconnected. So whether it's those of you sitting out there with your smartphones as we speak, whether it's your e-book readers or your tablets, whether it's your sling boxes or however you get your media now, or whether it's the connected TV, these things are all taking off. These all are accelerating, and consumers are changing their behaviors. So we do some research every year. We publish a paper like this, as I started to show you. As part of that, we go out and talk to a lot of people in the industry. We also go out and do a bunch of online panels and survey people. And some of the data from the 10,000 or so people we've surveyed over the last couple years, we track some of these patterns, and here we're just using the one of social networking. Where was the biggest growth in social networking in the last year? In the over 45 segment. So now you got to be a little careful. Some of you probably have kids you think are your friends on Facebook, right? Yeah, my daughter let my wife friend her on Facebook. My wife thinks she's seeing everything my daughter does. My daughter doesn't let her see anything that she's doing. She's got it all blocked, but my wife doesn't know that. The kids have already moved on. The kids have already figured out what to do next. But, you know, Facebook has become mass. You know, they're up to, 500 million subscribers or users this year, and the biggest growth is in the plus 45 segment. So we got to realize that these things are becoming mainstream. Now that doesn't mean we all do the same thing with it, doesn't mean we all use it. Different segments of the population use these materials in different ways. For some of it's a place to read things or connect. Others it's a place to post. Others it's a place to really author. But we have 3 segments that we look at, we've been using for a number of years. So here's where it gets participative, and I need your help. How many of you have a old-fashioned VHS or DVD player in your house? Okay. Now, how many of you does that device say 12 o'clock? Most of you don't want to admit it. But about half of you raised your hands that raised your hand the first time, and usually it's flashing 12 o'clock, right? Why? Because you probably never remember how to program it and you can't be bothered. We call you the massive passives. You're the ones that use the things that are easy. So for instance, when TiVo and replay first started in the US in 2001, DVRs, video recorders, people who would buy a TiVo would come up to me and they go, "It's the greatest thing I ever bought. Totally changed the way I watch television. I can watch it when I want to watch it, and I can skip the ads. It's great." The only problem was only 5% of the populace bought the devices. Why? Because the massive passives were not ready to take that TiVo home, hook it up to their cable, hook it up to their satellite, hook it up to their rabbit ear or antenna on their roof, and figure out how to make all these things work together. But when the cable or the satellite company, at least in the US, came along and made all these things work together and said, "We'll send you the bill together, we'll come to your house and install it, we'll show you how to use the one remote, and if you have any questions, please call us," then the devices took off. Now we have 43% penetration with those same devices. So those are the massive passives on this chart. Then we got the gadgeteers. How many of you have more than one device on you now? Show of hands. Okay. You're the gadgeteers. A, you're in this industry. B, you got to have the newest and coolest thing. You probably have a new cell phone every 6 months, and you usually walk around with more one device. And if you're old enough, a real gadgeteer has a Newton in their closet. Remember what a Newton is or was? People don't remember that Apple had something that didn't really take off. It was called the Newton. It was the first attempt at a PDA. But the gadgeteers buy all these things. And then we got the cool kids. The cool kids, we say, have lots of time, dangerous, lots of bandwidth, typically in a university, and not a lot of money, typically. So they tend to find ways to get things, not always being part of the economy in the way we would like them to be. And, you know, I don't know about your academic institutions here, but my daughter went to college a few years ago, and she came home freshman year, and her hard drive was full on the new PC I bought her. Being a sort of with it media cool guy, I said, "Oh, you've been stealing some music here. What's going on?" And she said, "No. Her hard drive was full of movies," and this was 6 years ago. And so then she went back to school, and the school put her on, you know, discipline of some kind because of what she was doing. So I was like, good, she's learning a good lesson that you shouldn't steal. No, the school wasn't worried about that. They were only worried that she was using too much bandwidth. And so they, suspended her rights to use the broadband network in the university for 30 days because she was using too much. So the cool kids, the gadgeteers, and the massive passives. And we track their behaviors. The gadgeteers and the cool kids are out there ahead. And the massive passive slowly, when it's made easy, adopt the patterns for them. So, that's happened to a large extent as we talked in social networking now. We see the next battlefront, as was talked about by the earlier speaker, as being in the mobile space. And that's where we're going to see the next activity increasingly. So the question is, with all these changes around us, what are we doing about the revenue gap, or this potential revenue gap? Now, this is a very debatable topic. People in the industry like to believe what they like to believe. So Nielsen published a report this week that says I'm wrong. And Nielsen says that there's no cannibalization of TV viewing by people watching content on the internet. Our data says overall that's maybe true, but if you look at it by segment, it becomes a problem. So if I look at the average television viewer is 50 years old. So if I look out at that 50-year-old segment, there isn't much cannibalization going on. But if I look at the other end of my chart there on the 18 to 24-year-olds, there's a lot of cannibalization going on. There's a lot of that age group telling us they're not watching as much television because they can get a lot of this content in other ways. So, do you all know what a Wii is? The game, the Wii, okay, at least somebody does out there. So about 4 years ago, my daughter's boyfriend buys her a Wii for Christmas. My daughter comes to me and says, "Dad, I can't play the Wii on an old-fashioned 13-inch tube television set. So Dad has to buy the more expensive flat-screen HD TV so she can play the Wii." So I go to her apartment in New York a few months later, and the Wii and the new television are hooked up. But the new HD TV is not hooked up to the cable box. She's not watching television on the HD TV. She's only using it to play video games. So, there's a different audience out there. So the answer now in the U.S. for this new generation and the problem of cord cutting. Do we know what cord cutting is? That's when the young people, and I would argue about 20% of them in new household formations, are cutting the cords. The industry is starting to argue they're not cutting the cords, and there's some truth to this. They're cord splitting or cord splicing, meaning they're cutting back some of their services. But how many of you have a landline telephone? Come on, admit it. About half of you still have landline telephones, and the other half don't or didn't want to raise your hands. But the next generation not only isn't going to have a landline telephone, in many cases they're saying, why do I need a cable or satellite subscription to get my content? And not because they're getting it free over the air, not because they're getting public broadcast, but because they're increasingly getting more of that content over the top. So in the U.S., a major source of content revenue is their cable subscription, which everybody would like to keep here. So the question becomes, how do you continue to get that revenue? So the industry has an answer, which we'll talk about in one of these models, and that answer is called TV Everywhere. Have you heard of that model? No? Okay. So in the U.S., 85% of the population has a cable subscription or satellite, which is how they get most of their content. And what they're saying now is, we will authenticate you, and if you have the cable or satellite subscription, you'll get the same content online. And for a consumer like myself, that's great. I love it. Thank you. But for the 18 to 24-year-olds, their answer is, So why do I have to pay $100 a month to get this whole bundle of content if I only want part of that? Why can't I buy it a la carte? And the industry says, oh, well, they're not going to be able to do that. And I go, well, that's like the music industry saying I can't buy singles. Ooh, that was a bad word. We only wanted you to buy albums. And so then I go, well, why is the same thing not going to happen to the cable company or the broadcasters? And the answer I get is because we're different. Don't believe it. The consumer has choice, the consumer has control, and increasingly they're going to do what they want to do. The question is, how do we make money out of them? And in our research, not only is the substitution real, in some cases it's not even substitution from analog to digital. They're leaving the market. So when we ask the, if you will, the digital experiences of people to get news online, a lot of them are going to traditional newspapers, but not very many. A lot of them are going to the Googles and the Yahoos and the online aggregators. Why aren't our traditional news companies, who are starving for money, why are they not the online aggregators? Again, traditional models, they don't want to do this. In the new world, they need to think differently. They need to think innovatively of how they make money. And if we go one for one, the problem is the broadcast television viewer, when they go online, is worth a lot less to us, and the newspaper viewer or reader is certainly worth a lot less to us. So part of the problem is how are we going to make this up? Now, part of the problem in broadcast is we don't have as much inventory online. You know, Hulu's experimenting with this, but you get 2 minutes of advertising in a show versus 8 minutes in the broadcast environment. So even if you can get a higher CPM for a more targeted, more responsive audience, you can't begin to make that up. So the challenge becomes, how much will the individual tolerate in that regard? And where is the value going? As I suggested to you, it's going increasingly to people who provide the experience. It's going to the device manufacturers, to some extent to distribution. It's gone less to advertising and less to paid content. So we've got to find ways to monetize in other ways. As we look at what's happening in the television space, digital advertising revenue should be a plus on top of the traditional broadcast advertising revenues. So the problem becomes what happens when the audience shifts to digital, and what happens when there's cannibalization. And we're suggesting that there's a break-even point which the younger audience has passed at about 30%. And when you get past that 30%, the additional digital revenues don't offset the loss in analog revenues. And, you know, we could see a point further out of a 50% switch if the younger audience dominates, and that could be a major challenge for the industry. So where's the opportunity? The world is growing, we see lots of challenge, but the opportunity is on focusing on the consumer experiencing, embracing new and different distribution platforms, and creating flexible and relevant and different revenue models. So let's go back to my friends in the music industry. Is the music industry in good shape or bad shape? It's lost, bad shape, thank you. It's lost 50% of its revenue. But our data says music's worth more than it ever was. We show that music revenues have grown 3% a year, compound annual growth rate, or the revenues associated with music, whereas the overall industry has lost 50% of their revenue. Where did it go? It went to the concert promoters, it went to Telefonica and other telephone providers, it went to the retailers, and most of all, it went to the music promoters. So we use this as an example of the industry's in trouble, but there's lots of opportunity for lots of people out there to make money. In fact, I sat in the boardroom of one of the major music companies in 1999 and said, let's discuss a scenario of the future. And that's the way I'd like to think about innovation, is to go out to the future and backcast to today. Too many people get stuck in extrapolating from today. And I said, let's talk about a scenario where all music is free. Well, they basically said, game over, why play? We can't talk about that. But there's a lot of things the music industry could have done that would have made them more of the revenue that's now gone to other people in the industry. And the challenge to the video content side is the same. How do you put communications, Telefonica, this connected world, content and commerce together? If you can put those together into a coupled, seamless, integrated, contextual experience, we believe there's the opportunity actually to make more money. Then the next question becomes, do people want to give you the information to do that? Isn't that a privacy issue, and won't people resist it? We survey this in our study, and we find that people don't like you to do that without telling them. They don't like you to use their data without telling them. But at least half of them say, we will give you the data if you give us something else in return, i.e. opt in, not opt out, and i.e. give us something of value in return. That can be monetary, it can be minutes on the cell phone, it can be content in the video space, but we're willing to play the game. And data analytics become very important here, and you can make that content more contextual. You can make it more contextual not only in terms of, I'm in the market for a car, so show me car advertising, but also in the digital nonlinear world, the ad doesn't have to get placed at 8 minutes past the hour, 15 minutes past the hour, 22 minutes past the hour, and 30 minutes past the hour. The ad can be placed wherever you want it in the content. So why not put the car ad next to the car scene? Somebody's doing this in the US now that we've worked with. They get a 20% premium for the advertising when they do that. So there are ways to use this data, to refine this data, to make money with this data. Then you've got to come up with the distribution platform and the willingness to pay or revenue models for each consumer group that we talked about. And the apps generation all of a sudden is willing to pay money for stuff that we were giving away free on the internet. Now in the mobile space, we have the opportunity to create new business models, and we have opportunity to do these micropayments and collect. So we're moving from a revenue model situation in 3 areas, and we look at it in terms of sponsored or somebody else pays, the consumer pays, or different bundles or componentization of packages. In all these cases, we're moving from one-to-many marketing models to consumer-centric, performance-based, from one price-fits-all to flexibility. We're moving from one form factor to where we try to reach the consumer, as somebody suggested, wherever they want, whatever screen. Your house of the future is going to have screens on every wall. You're going to look at content that technology exists as you drive down the road on your car. Hopefully not you as the driver, but the passenger will be watching that content up on the windshield. And those kinds of technologies are available today. But you need to make them more consumer relevant, and you need to make them more contextual. They have to be addressable, they have to be measurable, it has to be two-way. You have to know what you've shown me before, where you've shown it to me before, and what's needed to capture the revenue opportunity. There are lots of examples out there. You've seen different models on the right there around different music companies and things people are doing. But on the left, from our research, we asked people how they want to pay. Some people want to pay a la carte on demand. Some people want to pay in packages. Some people want to buy channels a la carte. Some want a cross-device or cross-platform bundle. We would suggest that all these models are going to be out there, and you're going to have to play in all these models. We also think, in terms of packaging the content, there are ways to increase value by both charging more and also keeping your subscribers longer. So if you're an HBO in the United States, or you're a Netflix or a TV Everywhere, as I talked about, you give them the people on the content on another channel. You don't necessarily charge them anymore, but what happens is they don't churn. You don't have the turnover costs. You don't have the acquisition costs of the new consumer. Or you can go the way Hulu is, though they lowered their price today to $8, or the Wall Street Journal of charging you extra for each of the platforms where you want to use their content. Or, as I say, you can take that component like the music company did, and you can start to sell the elements. You can sell the scenes. You can sell the chapters of a book. You can sell the articles from a magazine. And we think increasingly that'll be another way to add value. So there's a series of strategies for growth around using these new technologies, using the consumer experience, embracing these new platforms, and extending these revenue models. So we would engage with you around these social networking capabilities and the ways to broaden that experience. That means partner. That means be part of the system. What you don't want is what Apple did to the music industry. What you don't want is what Blockbuster did in the physical space. What you don't want is what Google may do in some of these new devices as well. Because if they become the platform, they become the dominant network, they take more of the total value out of the total value equation. So increasingly, you want to be the one in the driver's seat. You want to drive the value to the content. You want to have the content on all these platforms, and you want to be partnering to get the true value for your content. So the opportunity is there, the challenge is there, but the rewards will go to the people who can deliver the immersive experience with the flexible models. To do that, it requires building these new capabilities to effectively capitalize on all three opportunities. So again, big challenge, big opportunity, and I think we're going to stop there. And if anybody wants to talk about any of these issues or has some questions, happy to answer them or talk to them further. As I say, I think, we've been seeing these happen and develop over many years. I think the industry is getting serious about them, as we heard from some of the speakers earlier this morning. And the question is how we bring these models to reality. I would suggest that when you do that, there are these different segments, and you have to keep in mind, you can go after those people who are the gadgeteers with new models that might be a threat to your traditional models, while keeping most of your traditional models, because the massive passives are not going to change until the technology becomes very easy for them. So thank you very much. Appreciate being with you, and happy to take a question or two. If somebody has a question, we're happy to do that in English or Spanish, whatever works for people. There's one over there.
Yes, thanks a lot for the presentation. The question I have is, within all those scenarios that you described, who do you think it is digital transformation? Who do you see as the potential winners and losers?
$64,000 question. We'd all like to know the answer to that. I think the answer is it depends. It depends on how they play the game. If they play it like the music industry, it's certainly not the content providers. I think they've learned. I think they're playing it differently. I think if they play it right, increasingly they could get more of the value rather than somebody else. But clearly there's a role for content, there's a role for distribution, and there's a role for device manufacturers. We were working 3 years ago with some of the television set manufacturers on IPTV. They're trying to get that value too. So I think, that's to be determined, and who sets the experience and gets together in the consortium that becomes the dominant experience will get more of the value. Having said that, live sporting events like your football games, that value is always going to stay with the content owner. But for the non-live events, increasingly it's going to be who provides the best experience.
You think within each of the industries that there will be winners and losers, not that there will
Absolutely.
be winning one industry, but it will depend.
They could be the same, but they'll also be more transitory. So we think whatever technology wins is only going to win for a period of time, and then there are going to be new technologies and new standards. We're in an era, as we say in some of our CEO study work, of continual change and dynamic change. So it's not about who wins today, it's who keeps winning, and who keeps innovating, and who keeps adopting. Question over here. We will try not to keep you from lunch.
So, Juan Latasa from Director of TV from Vodafone, and the question is about the Hollywood approach to all this new brave world. So how do you see them moving into this direction? Are they learning the lessons from the music industry? Did they And when you presented to them this presentation, did they agree? Because I think they have a key role to play.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When I presented to them, so I've presented some of this to the president of one of the major media companies recently, and he said, we're doing all those things. I had the same discussion with the president of one of the music companies, and he said, they're making some of the same mistakes. So part of it is where you're looking at it from. I think they're being more progressive than the music industry was, but clearly, any legacy business tries to protect its legacy business. I always remember in the 1980s, we were working with oil companies, and the Seven Sisters, as they're called, and one of the oil companies started self-service gas stations. Which was a new thing in the U.S. at the time, and we went out to one of our major clients and said, well, what are you going to do about this threat? And they said, what threat? Our market share just went up. They got out of the full-service business and went into the self-service business. So there's a tendency to resist. When I went to the chairman of one of the studios for our CEO study in 2004 and talked to him about this stuff, he said, Saul, you're right, but let the next guy worry about it. I.e., I'm not going to be in this job long enough to have to deal with the consequences of it. When I went to see him in 2006, he said, yeah, we need to start to think about these things. Now in 2008, he's like, we need people who can think out of the box. We need business model innovation. So I think the answer is they're getting it, but like in any business, your legacy ways of doing business, and the majority of your business revenue still comes from where it used to come from. So if you look at the music industry in the United States in 2006, 5 years after Apple introduced the iPod, 94% of the revenue still came from physical media. So it's very easy to say, well, that's a small piece of my revenue, and I still got to focus on my core business, but meanwhile, you may be losing the future. My view is you can do both at the same time. This idea that you're going to cannibalize your own audience faster, I don't think so. Otherwise, somebody else will do it for you. Great question. Okay. Well, I thank you very much for being with you today, and somebody else has a question there. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I have a double question. One of them is, can a developer be a consumer? You must be a consumer. You want to understand to your consumer. And the other question is, how can you deal with the loyalty of your consumer?
Loyalty, I think, first of all, you do have to understand the consumer. You do have to understand the segments because the consumer's got control. Loyalty and brand loyalty become more important than ever. Harder to keep, harder to achieve, but if you've got it, it's worth a lot more, and you have to work very hard to keep it. I always tell the story of a number of years ago, somebody had a website I used to go to, and they said, we created this new website, come to it right away, see how great it was. Well, it was great, except it didn't work. And they lost my loyalty very quickly. So if you're going to be out there, your promises are going to be tested very quickly by the consumer, and you better meet their demands and their expectations. When Steve Jobs or Bill Gates gets up on the stage and the demo doesn't work, that's a serious problem. When it doesn't work for you as the consumer, when you go home to try it, that's an even bigger problem. The consumer is used to consumer products, not computer products. And part of the problem a lot of us in this business on the technology side get lost in is, so you had to reboot the machine. So you had to upgrade the software. Well, the consumer's used to a television set that you take home, you plug in, and turn it on, and it works for 10 years, and they don't have to do anything. Now we're telling them, it was alphaware, it was betaware, don't worry, it'll be better in the next version. Steve Jobs thinks you can hold your phone or your iPad the iPhone like this, the 4G, and what's the big deal that you can't hold it like this? Well, he didn't win that battle with the consumer, so the consumer wins, and you better pay attention to them. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Berman. De momento nada más, volvemos a las 5 menos cuarto de la tarde con la última.
This afternoon with FICO 2010, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Cosas de lo importante y lo difícil también, que es innovar y ser emprendedor. No se lo pierdan, luego nos vemos.